Noivern is a dragon flying type introduced in Generation 6. If we take a look at its stats, we can see that it has a very respectable speed stat of 123, outspeeding Pokemon that are traditionally thought of as being fast, such as Greninja, Dugtrio, and Raikou. While its base HP of 85 and 80 defenses aren't awful for an offensive Pokemon, we have to consider if Noivern has enough offensive firepower to justify this. Since Noivern's special attack is higher than its attack stat, we can assume that it is meant to use the former. Let's compare this special attack stat of 97 to other Pokemon so we can get a better context for how powerful Noivern might be. Noivern shares the same special attack stat as Dragalge, Go-Goat, Galvantula, and Guzzlord. Dragalge benefits from adaptability, which boosts the power of its stab moves, allowing it to be even stronger. And Guzzlord can boost after nabbing KOs with Beast Boost. Galvantula can spam Thunders with Compound Eyes, but isn't too much to write home about. Noivern's base 97 special attack is stronger than Tapu Koko and Tapu Fini at base 95, but Tapu Koko boosts its electric moves in terrain, and Tapu Fini has a more defensive profile. Other Pokemon with a base 95 special attack stat include Trimeco, Hisuian Decidueye, and Luxray. There are also quite a few Pokemon that have a higher base special attack stat than Noivern that you might not expect, such as Ghastly, Zeraora, Landorus, Therian, and Lucario. While these are a few cherry-picked examples, as a general rule of thumb, a good special attacker wants to have at least 120 base special attack, preferably 130 or more. Noivern's base 97 special attack pales in comparison, unfortunately. With lackluster defenses as well, the only good stat Noivern has is its speed. Let's consider how this stat stacks up in OU and below. In OU, base 123 speed is quite solid, outspeeding Iron Valiant, Sneasler before the ban, Iron Moth, and Ogerpon, Walking Wake, and the aforementioned Greninja. Of course, there is the elephant in the room, which is Booster Energy. With a free +1 to all their speed stats, Valiant, Moth, Wake, and even Great Tusk can outspeed a non-choice Scarf Noivern, which means that the 123 base speed tier is less valuable than it might otherwise be. Of course, there are also Pokemon that outspeed naturally as well, such as Dragapult, Ribombee, and Weavile, which is beginning to become more popular again. We might consider Choice Scarf as an option to mitigate these issues. After all, Choice Scarf Meowscarada is a thing on some teams, and Meowscarada has the same speed stat. However, there are two complications. First, Noivern is not very strong, as previously discussed, whereas Meowscarada has a much more serviceable 110 base attack, as long as a powerful move in Flower Trick. The second issue is that Noivern is weak to Stealth Rock, so it really wants to run heavy-duty boots. While Noivern does have access to Roost, a Choice Scarfed set locked into Roost is extremely exploitable and leaves you open to attack by the opponent. So, Noivern's speed is serviceable in LU, but not spectacular. What about other tiers? In UU, it speed ties with Meowscarada and outspeeds most of the commonly used Pokemon, with the exception of the aforementioned Weavile. So here, Noivern does find a good amount of success in outspeeding non-choice Scarf opponents. There are a few booster Pokemon here as well, such as Iron Treads, but they are far less annoying in UU as compared to OU. Now that we've looked at Noivern's stats, let's consider its moves. Noivern has a plethora of useful moves, including multiple dual stab options, Flamethrower and Focus Blast for coverage against Steel types, Roost, Defog, Taunt, U-Turn, and even Super Fang. With all of these moves, surely Noivern should be able to carve out some kind of relevant niche in a tier, right? Let's talk about today's real subject, or Moveslot Syndrome. In the Pokemon universe, any Pokemon is only allowed to know up to 4 moves at a time. While a Pokemon may have access to many useful battle strategies, only 4 moves may be brought into battle. This allows gameplay to be more balanced and more predictable, which is important since Pokemon is already a very prediction-reliant game. This also means that not every Pokemon is going to run rest to drag battles out forever, and it helps your particular Pokemon to be more unique compared to your opponents. As an example, you and I might both have a Hydreigon. Mine has Dark Pulse and Flash Cannon, but yours has Draco Meteor. While my Hydreigon loses in this particular matchup, it also has the ability to hit Fairy-type Pokemon, which yours does not. If Pokemon had access to all moves at all times, then these unique strategies would cease to exist. Or Moveslot Syndrome occurs when a Pokemon requires more than 4 moves to produce an effective moveset for the metagame in which it is playing. An example of this can be seen in Weavile, which wants to run a Dark-type move, an Ice-type move, Ice Shard, a fighting move for Pokemon like Kingambit, and Swords Dance. While a Choice Band set might not need the last move, what do you drop on a Heavy Duty Boots set? If you drop Ice Spinner, then your only Ice move is Ice Shard. Alternatively, you could drop the Swords Dance, but then you are just a weaker version of the Choice Band set. You might also forego running the Fighting type move and accept being walled by Kingambit, which might not even want to switch in on you, considering that you might have the move. But that becomes a mind game with the opponent only until they know your set. Once your opponent knows you can't touch them, they will switch in with impunity and you can't do anything about it. Ironically, the whole Kingambit line actually suffers a similar 4 Moveslot Syndrome themselves. I feel like we've forgotten about Noivern, so let's return and consider what kind of moves we might actually choose for Noivern. Well, we've already established that Noivern doesn't have the strongest attacking stat, but let's try this anyways. Does Noivern have a way to boost its special attack, like Calm Mind or Nasty Plot? No. It does get Dragon Dance, but we weren't hurting for a speed boost, and if base 97 special attack is not very good, you can imagine how bad Noivern's base 70 attack stat is, even after a Dragon Dance. Alright, so we can't get any power that way. What about a Choice Specs Noivern? Well, this might be fun, so let's consider what moves might go on such a set. Draco Meteor and Hurricane make for decent stab options, especially if we were to use Noivern on a rain team, so Hurricane had 100% accuracy. Flamethrower can hit the Steel Pokemon, although it will be weakened on a rain team, and U-Turn can round out the moveset for getting initiative on Pokemon like Blissey or Slowking. This is indeed a decent moveset for Noivern, but now let's consider some concerning points. First, we will be taking 25% from Stealth Rock on switch-in every time with this set. While Noivern does get Defog, we can't really run it on this set without giving up something important, and as we previously mentioned, choice-locked Pokemon don't usually want to be locked into a non-attacking move. Another problem arises in opportunity cost. Let's consider some other options we could have chosen for our team that might have been stronger. First, if we were building a rain team, what about Kilowattrel? Kilowattrel is faster, stronger, has more useful abilities, and has increased synergy with rain teams thanks to having both Thunder and Weather Ball. Zapdos can do the same thing in OU, and while it is slower than both Kilowattrel and Noivern, it is far stronger and has some added bulk. If I'm not running Noivern on a rain team, then let's think about Hurricane. Hurricane has a 70% accuracy outside of rain. This is the same as the notorious Focus Blast. I don't want to have to rely on such an inaccurate move. So, now maybe we could consider switching it over to Air Slash, which has a 95% accuracy. On a Choice Spec set, I suppose we could give up a bit of power for the sake of accuracy, right? Well, Air Slash is a pretty weak move, and while if the opponent goes into something like Volcanion, which would take over 50% from Air Slash, the opponent isn't likely to not have any better options. The opponent would be far more likely to go into a Pokemon like Empoleon, Iron Treads, or even Alolan Muck, which only takes a maximum of 30% from Air Slash. In most instances, Noivern will be able to get more power from Draco Meteor unless the opponent has a Fairy Pokemon. Noivern specs Air Slash does 36% to max HP Screamtail, and the Screamtail will Wish Protect Stall that out extremely easily. So, okay, Air Slash isn't a very good move, and we don't want to run Hurricane because we aren't on a rain team. Let's scrap the idea of running Dual Stab and use a different move. We could use Boom Burst with Terra Normal. Such a build has been seen on ladder many a time. This is the worst option, but it still has major issues with Steel types. Besides Boom Burst, Noivern doesn't really have much to work with on a choice spec set. Before we move on from the choice specs discussion, let's consider those pesky steel types. You could argue that Flamethrower is an effective deterrent because a spec's Flamethrower would cook them. However, this relies on a few assumptions. First, you are choice locked. If your opponent has Protect on their Pokemon, they can Scout, which move you lock yourself into. If they have a Regenerator Pokemon with decent bulk like Slowking, or even Tornadus Therian, they can Scout that way as well. Also, your opponent can just straight up predict you. A game of Pokemon becomes much more difficult when you aren't able to spam the moves you want to use. Noivern wants to use its stab moves, not a weaker coverage move. Another glaring concern is the existence of Pokemon like Heatran, Empoleon, and Hisuian Goodra. These Pokemon are usually specially defensive and don't care about fire coverage. We absolutely could run Focus Blast for these Pokemon. Focus Blast is even stronger than Flamethrower, so we have that going for us as well. I actually enjoyed using Focus Blast on Noivern in Generation 7, where Z-moves allowed Noivern to all-out pummel an opponent. However, outside of that context, we have to contend with the fact that Focus Blast is 70% accurate, and you don't want to have to rely on a 70% accurate move to land when you have a very good chance of dying if it doesn't connect. Also, the same thoughts about being locked into an unfavorable coverage move apply here even more than they did with Flamethrower. Finally, Focus Blast does a maximum of 60% to a leftovers Hisuian Goodra. Focus Blast with the choice specs does a maximum of 60% to a leftovers Hisuian Goodra. And you get one shot by a return Draco Meteor, so it really doesn't consistently do the job. As one final nail in the coffin for choice specs Noivern, Noivern doesn't always get the KO even with the added specs power. As we just saw against Goodra, many Pokemon will be able to easily live Noivern sits and retaliate. This can be bulky Pokemon that are designed to wall Dragon or Flying Pokemon, like Empoleon, or Clodsire, which takes less than 50% from Specs Draco Meteor. But even offensive Pokemon, like Hisuian Arcanine, have a chance to live Specs Draco Meteor and KO in return. We could change our nature to Modest to gain the extra power to pick up some of these KOs, but that does leave Noivern outsped by Pokemon such as Specs Gengar and even Iron Jugulus without booster energy. Since Noivern isn't that bulky, it relies on its speed to stay healthy and pick off weakened Pokemon by outspeeding them. So this limits the number of Pokemon we can revenge kill. Overall, choice specs is limited by Stealth Rock switch-ins and a slew of Steel and Fairy types that force it to choose between unfavorable positioning with stab moves or unfavorable non-stab moves like Flamethrower or U-Turn. Additionally, there are many Pokemon that are far better at being choice specs attackers than Noivern, so Noivern isn't the best option for this niche in any tier it is allowed. A Throat Spray Terra Normal set bears a quick mention now as a better way to run a Boom Burst set, but this is a gimmick and requires giving up your Terra to function at all. And as we've seen, you'll have to rely on Focus Blast to break the inevitable Steel Pokemon coming in. Let's move on to a Heavy Duty Boots set, which is what you will usually see. We can easily slot Draco Meteor into the first position as our main stab option. We won't bother running a flying move, since we've previously seen that Air Slash is too weak, and Hurricane is only really good on Rain, where Noivern doesn't fit the pace of a team if it isn't choice specs. Now that we aren't choice locked, we can start to consider some other options. First off, let's toss Flamethrower on the set to deal with steel types. In theory, we don't need it, but you don't want to be totally walled by steels and fairies. Now let's look at Noivern's support moves. The first move that catches my eye is Defog. In this generation, there aren't a whole lot of Pokemon that get access to Defog. This could be really useful to help the team out, and since Noivern is running Boots, it won't even care about what kind of hazards are on the field. Noivern's speed also means that it is likely to be able to defog at will, before the opponent can taunt or KO Noivern. Very useful. Finally, we have to decide what comes last. This is where 4 Moveslot Syndrome rears its ugly head. Do we want U-turn to be able to force switches and pivot, or pivot on unfavorable matchups? Do we want Roost for longevity? Do we want to be able to use Noivern with Taunt to outspeed hazard setters like Vigavolt, or prevent setup from Pokemon like Poltegeist? We could run Super Fang to get a guaranteed 50% off on Pokemon coming in even. Let's decide to go with Roost on this set, since I don't need U-turn to pivot. I can just predict my opponent because I'm just that good. Taunt is for losers as well, so my set is now Draco Meteor, Flamethrower, Defog, and Roost. This allows me to get off good damage with Draco Meteor and then Roost off the damage my opponent does. However, now that I think about it, Draco Meteor does drop my special attack by 2 stages, and I won't want to stay in. So U-turn would allow me to switch out while still doing some amount of damage on the turn I need to switch to reset my stats, which sounds useful. Also, I remember the Noivern isn't actually that bulky, so maybe Roost isn't too useful after all? Let's drop Roost and put on U-turn instead. This gives me a safer switch against those unpredictable ladder players that are just clicking buttons anyway. They always make unnecessary double switches and then I look stupid for making the right play. So U-turn will let me scout their intention. But what happens if I get knocked off or the battle lasts for more than 20 or 30 turns? I sure will miss Roost. But the whole point of this set is to run Defog, since Pokemon decided that they would take the move away from like half the guys that got it. Maybe I could put Roost over Flamethrower? But that won't work. I need that move to deal any kind of damage to Tinkaton. If I use this set in OU, it could even hit the best Defog blocker, Golden Go. So I don't want to drop Flamethrower. I obviously can't drop Draco Meteor. Are we really going to run a Pokemon without a stab move? It won't do any type of damage at all. And if it runs into a faster taunt user, it would just have to U-turn out for like barely any damage. And now you see the problem that Noivern experiences every time it loads up into a team builder. We didn't even try to put Taunt on that set, and already we are struggling to create a 4-move set that doesn't experience major problems when faced with a very standard roadblock, mostly Steel and Fairy types, but really any special wall can whittle Noivern down. If you are trying to keep Noivern healthy with Roost, then it can't provide any utility to the team, despite having the moves to do it. If you drop Noivern's coverage, then it can usually get a Defog or Taunt off, but it will be forced into very bad situations where it will be forced to switch out because it is walled. Before we wrap up, let's briefly consider Noivern's abilities. Frisk is an okay ability in Draft, where unusual items are often seen on Pokemon. However, on Ladder, or even in tournaments, you usually will know what your opponent's item is. Noivern's other useful ability in singles is Infiltrator. This isn't a bad ability by any means, but it only helps if your opponent is using screens or substitute. Otherwise, it doesn't do anything. This means that Noivern won't be getting any help from its ability to give it more power or more longevity. So, there are better special attackers, there are better dragon and flying types, there are better taunt users, and there are even better defoggers. Is there any niche Noivern can fill? Well, as previously mentioned, Noivern can run Flamethrower plus Defog to scare Golden Go. If Golden Go switches in to block Defog and takes 60% from Flamethrower, you can two-shot it and then get the Defog off, preventing Sticky Web or Spike stacking from destroying the rest of your team. This assumes, however, that Golden Go is not a bulky set, and it doesn't terastallize to a type such as Water and recover off the damage. You could predict the Terra and Draco in the following turn, in theory. However, this whole sequence requires a ton of prediction, but it is technically possible and is somewhat unique, although Talonflame can do it better since it is faster, it resists Scarf Golden Go's Make It Rain, which does a ton of damage to Noivern, and the Flamethrower would be stab as well, meaning that even without investment, Flamethrower is still a 2-hit KO. The Noivern does have the surprise factor, because Talonflame is a fire type, but if the goal is to get the Defog, then the Talonflame would probably be a better option. In the RU tier, Noivern fills the niche of a fast dragon, which allows it to threaten Pokemon like Goodra and Cyclizar. Its flying typing also gives it a defensive role, similar to Salamence in UU, where it can come in on Earthquakes, resist Slitherwing and Heracross's Bug plus Fighting combo. It even resists Tauros Aqua's dual stab. Funnily enough, despite Noivern not having the strongest defensive stats, it can find a niche where taking 1 or 2 resisted hits is enough. Noivern still needs Draco Meteor, and Roost is required to continue taking those resisted hits. Flamethrower is very important to hit Tinkaton, Revavroom, etc., and then U-turn is usually the last move to aid in pivoting. U-turn is especially useful to pivot on switches to bulkier Pokemon that can take Noivern's hits into a very strong physical attacker that can smash holes in the opponent's team, but that might be a little slow to come in on a fast Pokemon. The RU tier has the correct blend of Pokemon for Noivern to find a niche. Sometimes it's not about what a Pokemon can do, but rather about what it can stop other Pokemon from doing. In this case, having an answer to Slitherwing and the like while pivoting into other stronger Pokemon is all Noivern needs to be able to do. This is why Smogon tiers are so valuable. They allow weaker Pokemon, like Noivern, that would otherwise be completely overshadowed by stronger options, to find a place to establish a niche. Thanks for watching today's video. I hope to have more like this out in the future, where I'll try to discuss one core competitive Pokemon concept alongside a feature Pokemon. Oh, and one final thing. Game Freak, please give Noivern Nasty Plot. That would be so fun.